Okay, so I'm about to broadcast. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. My name is Ramona Guargues, and I'm the co-founder and editor of San Jose Spotlight, the city's first independent nonprofit news organization. And I'm so excited tonight to introduce you to some columnists who are going to speak about their experience with homelessness and living on the streets of Silicon Valley. We launched San Jose Spotlight a year and a half ago with the mission of elevating the voice of the voiceless and giving a voice to those people who traditionally don't have one. And throughout that year and a half, one of the things that I'm most proud of that we've accomplished is a column called In Your Backyard. We started this in November of 2019. And this column allowed the readers to hear directly from people who have lived on the streets of Silicon Valley and can talk about that experience. I've been a journalist for over 10 years, and I've written about countless homeless individuals and interviewed them my entire career. But when you read about those stories, you see them and read them from the lens of the reporter, right? From our notebook. We are choosing the quotes that you read. We are picking the sound bites that you hear, and it's coming through our notebook and through our eyes. So In Your Backyard is unique because it gives the readers and the viewers an opportunity to hear directly from the people who are impacted, unfiltered and raw. And it's the first of its kind. We've never done anything like this in Silicon Valley, in the South Bay. So I'm super proud of this column. And today you're going to hear from people who are writers for that column. They're going to answer questions about misconceptions of homelessness, solutions. You know, oftentimes when our well-intentioned elected leaders and nonprofit leaders are talking about solutions to homelessness, that conversation doesn't include homeless people, right? So it's really important today that the homeless people and the people who live on the streets can share what they think the solution is to this problem and how we can make some progress. So before we begin, I also want to thank our partner SV at Home for allowing us to do this during Affordable Housing Month. I want to thank our sponsors, Abode Services, Destination Home, and Santa Clara County Housing Authority. I want to also thank Frank Ponciano, who's a tireless advocate for the homeless community and helped put this together as well. We had a slight program change. Today we won't have Cecilia Martin and Ralph Duran with us, but we do have Anthony King, who also has lived experience, and will be sharing his story with you guys today as well. At the end of this forum, for about 15 minutes, we'll have time for questions and answers. Please type your questions at the bottom of the screen. There's a little spot there in the chat box, and we'll make sure to get those questions to the panelists and make sure to get those answered. Please specify who the question is to, or if it's to everyone, that's fine too. Just let us know and we'll make sure to get those questions answered. So with that, thank you again for tuning in. We're so excited to be able to bring you this groundbreaking program and to allow you, again, unfiltered, to hear from people who have this lived experience. I want them to tell you a little bit about themselves before we start. So we're going to do some introductions. They're going to explain, their story and why they're here today. And I'm going to start with Anthony. So Anthony, please tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and your background.
My name is Anthony King. I am the co-founder and this year's co-chair of the Lived Experience Advisory Board, LEAN for short. It is the lead aid is simply of men and women who are currently or formerly homeless, and we are an advisory board of the Louis County COC Continuum Care.
I don't think, excuse me, one moment. I'm so sorry. I think Anthony's having some trouble connecting, so we're going to actually start with someone else. I apologize. We'll get to Anthony in just a moment. We're going to get the technical issue figured out. This is part of staying home and working from home, so thanks for hanging in there with us. In the meantime, we'll start with Chris. We'll have Chris tell you a little bit about herself, and then we'll get Anthony on in just a moment. Chris?
Hi, I'm Chris. I am a San Jose native. I was born and raised in Brooklyn. However, I have been homeless, but got housed thanks to support housing and some of our sponsors. Thanks to them, I've been the past year happily housed, and I'm here to share my experience of what it's like to be unhoused, to enlighten everyone, that not everyone, I'm here to enlighten that everyone has a story, everyone has a background, and that we should look over the need or through them, and that every voice is important. So, and I'm. Oh.
Hi.
Okay.
Okay, now you can hear me. Hi. Okay. Let's see. Let me start over. My name is Chris, and
I from San Diego, and I was unhoused for 9 years.
and
For
before
then,
then,
I grew up in Little Glen, and so
I had this mentality of
um,
um,
superficialness
that
that, well, I'll get into that
later,
but
but I want to instill in you kind of
um,
a brief. I don't know how to explain it, but I'm getting all worked out.
I want to show you that not all of your
Reservation,
not everything that you expect of someone who's unhoused is true. Um, we all have stories to tell, and it needs to be heard and to be felt. And
and
and if you like it or not, the moratoriums that are going to be lifted, you might end up being homeless too one day. And you don't want to shun people who actually help.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris, for sharing your story, and telling the viewers a little bit more about yourself. It looks like Anthony's joined, so we'll go ahead and have Anthony unmute and tell us a little bit about his background and his story.
Hi, my name is Anthony. I am one of the founding members and the additional co-chair of the Lived Experience Advisory Board, which is a COC component, like a team of care component, that actually examines with continuum care staff and county staff different aspects and programs that are implemented here in the county for combating homelessness, and actually with the hopes to make changes in real time so that the county and its contracted partners can make a difference in people's lives immediately. Before being successfully housed 7 years ago, I lived on the streets for about 15 years in a lot of varying places, but mostly here in San Jose. I've lived as far north as Portland, Oregon, and as far east as Portland, Maine. And today I work as a grassroots outreach coordinator, trying to help those who are still experiencing homelessness try to reconnect with the system in the hopes of having all my peers, have the same opportunity for housing that I had.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anthony. And finally, let's hear from Jerome Shaw about his background and experience.
Hi, my name is Jerome Shaw. Currently living in a shelter in Sunnyvale, and I've been homeless since 2013. Actually, my journey began in 2013. I'm going to basically kind of walk you through the situations that have kind of led to my homelessness. I guess I can tell my story, so I can tell my story now. I currently have a son who is 14 years old, Isaiah. My son he lives in Oakland right now with his mother. He is on the autism spectrum. He also has ADHD, probably battles with depression also. I'm sure he is just an exact replica of me. in 2004, I believe, after many job losses and disconnecting with people. I myself was diagnosed with major depression, social anxiety, and also ADD, not ADHD. It's not hyperactivity, it's just inattentiveness or aloofness, I guess you could say. And so basically, I think me and my son are the same, like in a nutshell. So in 2013, I was basically living in West San Jose with my son. I was single father at the time. My son was 8 years old at that time. I had full custody of my son, had him in a really good school district since, I was in the Cupertino school district, even though I lived in West San Jose, because Cupertino has a really good special needs program because they always have funding. In 2013, I was unemployed. My fourplex that I was living in was purchased, and basically I was forced out of my unit because the owner of that purchased the building was basically moving into my unit. I think it was probably the best unit because I kept it really clean. That was in June of 2013. I had never been homeless before. So basically that summer, I was living in hotels with my son, basically commuting him back and forth to school. I was lived in downtown San Jose a lot, wherever places I could find cheap hotels. Did that for about a few months, and then I was able to kind of couch surf with some friends. And, for the whole year, I believe 2013 through 2014, I was able to, live with friends in different places and keep my son in school. 2013, November, I was able to get a job with Santa Clara County, actually in the assessor's office. It was a really good job. I worked there for almost 2 years. In 2015, beginning of 2015, I had kind of had a mental break and ended up getting hospitalized for about a month. Ended up losing custody of my son, losing my job eventually through the county through a lot of mishaps. And then finally, 2016, I was still on the streets. I kind of went through another episode of depression and ended up kind of losing contact with a lot of people. Ended back up in the hospital and then ended up in the shelter after my hospitalization. I've been back and forth between jobs since then. It was always hard to hold on to jobs and keep in touch with people because of the mental illness that I was battling with. I was finally able to get a job with the union, sheet metals union, which basically fits my background very, very well. I'm not a very good people person, and I can just work hard, and my work kind of speaks for itself instead of having to deal with I guess office politics and things like that. So I've been in the shelter for the last couple of years. It's tough to find a place to live in this Silicon Valley area because it's so expensive. And I'm basically working towards trying to find a place to be able to bring my son back to me in this area because the area that he's in right now is in a very good environment for him, socially or academically. And, hopefully I can shed some light on some people's views or misconceptions about what they think homeless people go through and how they got in the situations that they are.
Right. Thank you, Jerome, for that that background information. And, you know, it's a perfect leadway into our next question. And I want everyone on the panel to answer this one. I want to talk a little bit about misconceptions, right? What people think homelessness is and what it actually is. And you guys are the faces of that. So I think it's really important to, you know, delve into those conceptions and misconceptions that are out there. So let's start with Chris. Chris, tell us a little bit about, you know, what you think are some of the misconceptions that residents of Silicon Valley may have about their neighbors who are experiencing life on the streets.
Okay, well, first I want to say that when you say misconceptions, I think the biggest point is they're misconceiving themselves. Being homeless, when I was homeless, before I was homeless, I was successful. When I was homeless, I was also successful. I survived. I learned a whole new world, and I think the misconception that society has, I call them the daywalkers, the people, you know, that work and do what they do. What there's their set structure. When they do what they do, they look down on people, and they shouldn't. We're all the same, and that's the misconception, is that they think that they're better, and it hurts, because I still remember when I used to feel that way, when I used to think that I was better, and I went through some terrible things that led me to being in the situation where I was homeless, and I didn't think that it was ever possible. I didn't know. Well, in Willow Glen, domestic violence or anything like that wasn't talked about. It wasn't spoken of. It wasn't heard of, and you sure as heck didn't expose your husband or anything to that nature. You were outcasted. So, you know, I think a huge misconception that everyone has about homeless is that they're someone different. They're not different. We are the same. The only difference is that people with houses can mask it better. They're not out in the open. They're not on. Okay, all right. They're not on. They're not in open's eyes. So for me, I think the biggest misconception is that they think that we're either less than, or that they think that we're lazy, or that, and speaking on that note, the hardest working people that I have met is a homeless person trying to keep their personal property safe, sound, and still trying to maintain a job, like my fellow panelists over here, Jerome and Anthony, and everyone that does everything that they can to be a success and to better and want and strive and need. And that's more than I can say for some people that are housed. So that's all I have to say about that.
Right, that was powerful, you know, that we're all the same, essentially. What do you think about, you know, some of the misconceptions that Chris shared, Anthony, and what would you add to that?
I think the misconceptions out there that many people have is that people experiencing homelessness either want to be there, or that they've done something really bad to become homeless. And that's just not so. As we look at it here in Silicon Valley, the economic environment here is such that a lot of people who are struggling, as we see more and more people living in cars and in their RVs, everyone is just a paycheck away from
being homeless in this valley. And this pandemic right now kind of demonstrates that clearly about how like a lot of people are just barely hanging on. But I believe that if people were to actually take a moment to not look at that person, even if they are or not going through some type of trauma when they come across them, but just to try to put themselves in that person's shoes and maybe backtrack to see the things that may have happened to them. When I became homeless, before I became homeless, I used to have the same misconceptions that, oh, these guys are lazy, they want to do this. But I met so many people who were escaping domestic violence, children shunned by their families for lifestyle choices, foster age youth, transitional age foster youth in a foster care system that has greatly failed many, and a lot of other situational events that have led to homelessness. And so like, we can't just sit here and think that these, use these common misconceptions that these people want to be here or that they've done something wrong.
Right, that makes sense. Jerome, what would you add to that in terms of misconceptions that people have about the homeless community?
Well, I agree with what Anthony said and what Chris said. You know, house people have the outlook that, homeless people are different than they are. A lot of homeless people get, a bad rep for, what you see them doing out on the streets. The individuals that, maybe have mental health issues or, substance abuse issues are just like a small portion of like the homeless individuals that are out actually on the streets. I think homeless people get like a bad rep of, this is how all homeless people are, but when it comes to things like, or if you see a teacher who does something wrong to a student, it's like, oh, that's just an outlier, that's just a bad apple out of the whole bunch. Or same thing with like, law enforcement. Oh, that's, something goes wrong. It's like, oh, not all law enforcement's like that. This is just like a bad incident. But you see a homeless person, you think, oh, this is how the entire population is, which is unfair. I think a lot of homeless people don't get, what's the word? I guess fair judgment from people, because the homeless community is just like any other community in America. I mean, it's just a microcosm of like how America works. The shelter that I stay at, you have families there. You have people men and women that get up every day, to go to work. Well, before COVID hit, people that were trying to survive, basically they're just the working poor. You have kids there that will get up every morning to go to school, come back, do their homework, and just be kids. The homeless community is just, it is the same as everywhere in America, but people don't actually view us like that because they feel like, yeah, maybe they chose the situation that they're in. But it's just like life it's just a matter of circumstance. I worked at a corporation called CRC Health Group in Cupertino, and it was a facility that served at-risk, where they had at-risk youth facilities and like methadone clinics. Obviously those individuals were able to pay for their kids or, themselves to, get treatment, but if you don't have some family members or you don't have insurance, if you're an at-risk youth, you could have been, instead of being in a facility getting treatment, you could be, out on the streets, living in a tent. It just depends on your life circumstance. And again, like Anthony said, with this whole COVID thing, a lot of people are feeling the pressure of what am I going to do next? It could be, you or someone that could be out on the streets because they haven't been getting income and can't afford to pay their rent. This whole COVID pandemic kind of shines a light on like how vulnerable people are, you know, and how many working poor people there are actually out there, and you know, like the thin line between actually having a home and being homeless.
Thanks for sharing, Jerome. I think that term "working poor" is really powerful, and it represents so many people here in Silicon Valley, because there is that misconception that why don't they just get a job? But it sounds like a lot of the people you come across in the shelter do have a job. They're working every single day, and it's still not enough. Or they're living in their cars and they're trying to make ends meet. And now with COVID-19, things have really changed for the worse. And speaking of the coronavirus and the pandemic that we're facing, this has raised a lot of questions about how our government has communicated or not communicated with the homeless community to prepare them for the pandemic, to help them get supplies to protect themselves and protect others. And it reminds me a lot of, you know, a few years ago, not long ago, when I covered the Coyote Creek flood, and the same questions came up about why weren't the homeless individuals prepared for this? Why weren't we warned? Why weren't they told? And so I want to talk to you guys a little bit about how the city and how the county prepares the homeless community when there are emergencies such as the Coyote Creek flooding and now, you know, the COVID-19 pandemic. So with this question, I'm gonna direct this to two of you, to Jerome and to Anthony. Anthony, how do you think that the city and county can better communicate with the homeless community during emergencies?
I think to be when there aren't, in times when there aren't emergencies, more thought put into this question and with actionable things. One of the things I feel is that the Universal Lifeline program needs to be re-examined from top to bottom, with maybe the state taking it over from these individual distributors, and then doling it out to the counties, such like the same way that the CalFresh program is. I think that would like alleviate a lot of issues, because you would, just as a CalFresh participant automatically qualifies for Medi-Cal, they would automatically qualify for the Universal Lifeline program, and then be able to pick, you know, all three up at once. And then the program would be able to, like, you know, distribute things through, you know, through the county or the city when need be, like the same way they do Amber Alerts. But also, I think back in 9/11, after 9/11, you know, the general public was made aware that cities, counties, feds, and the state, they all have like emergency scenarios where they have things planned. But it seems like these past two scenarios, the Coyote Creek and this pandemic, that people experiencing homelessness, and even like a lot of poor people, might not have been factored into those equations when these emergency operation groups make these plans. And I think like after this is over, when we're re-examining how we did with this pandemic, that we also look at how we didn't do and what we can do to make sure that the next situation, you know, these people at the so-called bottom rung of our socioeconomic ladder are also taken into consideration a little bit more than they have been in the past.
Prepared.
Well, I think, you know, the cities and the county, like Anthony was saying, like they need to actually be more hands-on. Right now, they, I won't say pass the buck, but I guess I just said pass the buck to, you know, a lot of nonprofit organizations, and they're, you know, dependent on these nonprofit organizations to, you know, do the brunt of the work of dealing with individuals and, you know, providing information and services to homeless individuals but the county is the one that's funding, these nonprofits. If the county has social service off, the county has social services offices, and the social services office provides services to each individual, in the county. And if you're going to social services, then you most likely are, more low income or homeless and, basically poor. And, I don't understand why the county isn't able to set up some type of department or division, itself, instead of, having nonprofits, handle all the dirty work per se, that the county, I feel, doesn't want to do. I think the county kind of just throws money at things and turns a blind eye when it comes to, the organizations that they provide funding to, and they're dependent on, the answers and that they receive about how these operations are going and what these organizations are doing, but there's no like audit trail or anything like that to actually make sure that these organizations are providing the services and providing the level of services that they say that they're actually doing. And I think that's one of the main pitfalls of having a lot of nonprofit homeless organizations, because homelessness is, unfortunately, it's a business, and not, everyone wants to make it seem like, their organization is helping so much and they care so much, but there's still a bottom line to a lot of these nonprofit businesses. And, I think the county needs to have, bring out their magnifying glass and actually see what these organizations are doing, instead of taking the words from, the organization CEOs or CFOs and things like that, and actually have people go and see what these organizations are actually doing, instead of just kind of taking their words for it. Because if they had a department with analysts and, big thinkers, problem solvers that actually, had an eye view of what is actually going on with the homeless people, then I think they will be better prepared for like emergency situations and things like that. Because I don't think during this whole COVID thing, they weren't prepared, because they actually didn't know what each organization was doing from a nonprofit perspective. And then, it was always like one step behind when, some kind of emergency came up or some situation came up. So I think that basically the county needs to have a specific like homelessness type of department to better engage with the homeless community.
Great, thanks for sharing those thoughts, Jerome. Speaking of sort of the government processes, one thing that's very controversial and it comes up all the time is the abatement process, which is basically the sweeps, right? When they go in there and they sweep homeless encampments, oftentimes because there have been complaints from residents, and so city officials go in there and sweep. I want to talk about that process. It's a controversial question, but I think it's an important one. And I want to open this one up to Chris and to Anthony. Let's start with Anthony, if we could this time. What are some of the shortcomings in the city of San Jose's homeless sweeps process? And what are some things that they can do to improve or to replace it?
When we talk about sweeps, we're talking about, to quote a colleague of mine, Robert Aguirre, a game of whack-a-mole. And I mean, we're talking about wasting taxpayers' dollars, because all you're doing is just pushing the problem down the street or to another part of town because of, like you said, generated complaints. What I really think there needs to be done is a good faith effort for the county, the city, and the state to look at public owned lands to develop safe, sanitary, and secure properties for people who are still living outdoors to stay at while more housing opportunities are developed. And at the same time, there needs to be a little bit more oversight into the process. And also more, as we saw with the closing of the encampment that was known as the jungle, there was a measure of housing subsidies applied as well. And when it was all said and done with, everybody involved in a political manner said that was done in a great manner. So if that was done in a great manner, then that process should be emulated, which meaning that every abatement that's done by the city of San Jose, no matter the size, should come with some measure of housing subsidies for people who are being, swept. And if there's not, then there has to be looking at perhaps maybe slowing down the abatement process. And that's also going to take a little bit of education on the city's part and with its contracted partners to show like the outlying community, why this encampment may have, sprouted up in their neighborhood. And I know it's like, every citizen's right to call their local council member to complain, but I think we all have to look at the other side of that framework. It's also our duties as citizens to actually push our elected officials to come up with other solutions and to actually look at the other solutions ourselves. And that goes back to the sanctioned encampments that I was speaking of. We see a little bit of it, beginning to like take serious conversation and even more now than it does by maybe 5 years ago, but it still needs to be looked at.
Thanks, Anthony. And one thing I hear a lot from people is how their items are treated, right? So when a encampment is swept, what happens to their tents and their belongings? And I know the city of San Jose had talked about a proposal where there would be lockers. Some of the lawmakers wanted to have lockers where people can store their stuff throughout the day. But I don't think that ever happened. And I know that a lot of people are concerned with how their items are treated and how their items are discarded when an encampment is swept. So Chris, I want you to weigh in on that process, the sweeps process, and what are some things that can be done to improve or to replace it?
Thank you. Yes. When I was homeless, I actually got swept 3 or 4 times, and it always came. Actually, never got posted. We never had any type of warning. And keep in mind, these were our belongings. These were all the things that we had. We carried them on our backs. We carried them every day if we needed to. But when we actually established what we thought was what we could call home, we tried to start roots there. And they would come through and they would literally demolish it in front of us. And almost they would look at us and grab our belongings and pick what they wanted and keep what they wanted and then smash the rest of it and make an even bigger mess. I mean, me and my husband, we kept our site clean. I mean, and that's another thing that the county needs to provide is, a way for them to keep their area clean, so that way it's not a nuisance on, the neighbors and stuff like that. But that's another story. But it was so painful every time that it happened to have to start over and over and over again from fresh. It was like tearing, like ripping a scab. And I never ripped scabs, that's gross, but that's a weird analogy. Sorry, I just said that. But yeah, it was painful to go through that, and to know every time that we would accumulate something that meant something to us, even though it was another person's trash. To us, it was something special that we made special, and it meant something to us. And they would take it and look you straight in the eye and not even care. And that to me, it just shows, I mean, something needs to change with that. Especially what needs to happen is people need to remember that the homeless are humans. They deserve respect, and they've been forgotten, and that's not okay. That's not okay. So, I don't know.
Thank you for describing that. You've been through it, and it sounds traumatizing, and I appreciate you sharing that experience. And I just want to remind viewers who are watching, please submit questions. We're about halfway through our prepared questions. We have 2 more to go. I see some hands up, so I will look at these questions and make sure we get to them. We've got 2 more coming for our panelists that are prepared, and then we'll get to the audience questions. Thank you guys for submitting them. So, we talk a lot about the problem of homelessness. I mean, that's constantly, in the headlines, and it's something that is constantly, being discussed publicly. We don't talk enough about solutions, and we certainly don't talk enough about solutions, I think, with you folks who've been there and have been through it. So this is a question to everyone, and please keep your remarks a little bit brief so we can get to some of the audience questions. But I really want to hear from you, what are some solutions that you think the local governments can take to help alleviate homelessness and the crisis that we're facing here in Silicon Valley? And with this one, why don't we start with you, Jerome, and then we'll go to Chris and Anthony next.
Okay. Well, I think, homelessness, it's a nationwide, issue. I think the federal government, state and local governments need to have some solutions put in place to help alleviate, this crisis that we have. My opinion is, obviously there needs to be more low income, very low income housing available for individuals. There needs to be more permanent supportive housing for those individuals that are elderly or have disabilities. And the government itself, elected officials, I think have to have like a real vested interest in helping out the homeless. I heard something, I don't know where I heard it from, but I heard that homeless people don't provide votes. It's like there's no money from, like, homeless people don't donate, and homeless people don't have money, so politicians don't have like a real vested interest in helping those individuals. I think that view has to change. Unfortunately, we live in a capitalistic society where money drives basically everything. But and those that have the money win, and those that don't have the money lose. I know that there has been, bond measures and things that the county has done to try to alleviate the homelessness issue or the lack of affordable housing. But a lot more needs to be done with the population increases that are projected over the next 10 or 20 years. These low income or very low income housing units that are being built won't sustain like the homeless population or the poor population. I also think that there needs to be like a loopholes filled for when there are housing units or high-rise apartment units or anything that are being constructed by developers, that there has to be like a certain amount of units set aside for low income or very low income individuals, instead of allowing developers to pay into a fund to have an in lieu of fee of providing low income or very low income housing units within their establishments. Because if you pay an in lieu fee to something and then you have a bucket of money from all these developers, you still don't have a developer who's willing to build low income or very low income housing because they say that they're not going to make enough profit off of it. So I don't know, I think just the whole outlook, of how money is like the deciding factor of whether people have housing or if they don't, has to be changed. And that starts with our elected officials who are, running the government.
Thanks, Jerome. That's an interesting perspective too on the blue fee fund. I've heard a lot of people say that we need to do away with that and developers should just build the housing on the private side. So thanks for sharing. Chris, what are your thoughts about some of the solutions that local governments should be pursuing?
Okay, from my experience, this is tough because I have respect and I also have complaints in regards to this. I find that they get the funding and they fill their quota, but what they're not doing is fulfilling what, like for instance, the mental and health wellness. For when people do get off the streets and get housed and get this, for some people, it's their first opportunity of actually having something of theirs. They don't know. It's all new to them. I mean, it's like opening, a brand new present. And some proprietors, some establishments have made it seem that they are on top of their game and that all this funding that they've gotten is actually going towards what it's meant for, and it's not. I've seen a lot of people, good people, fall at the waistline because they weren't given the opportunity with this gift. They weren't given the tools that they were promised to be able to make it a success. And that is just another, in their eyes, I see it in their eyes when I talk to them, that they feel like they failed. And it's not them that failed. It's the people that were entrusted with something to help someone succeed, and they let that person down, and that is a tragedy, and that needs to change. I'm tired of hearing these commercials and this, that, and the other of all these donations and whatever, and it actually not going to the cause. Accountability, I've been taught this word it's imprinted in my brain, thanks to Mr. Friend. Accountability is everything. It's key. Me as a homeless, ex-homeless person, if you say something, do it, because all that I've known is being let down time after time after time, whether it be from law enforcement, whether it be from a counselor, whether it be from a friend that you think is a friend. That's all you know. And so it's refreshing for once to see someone stand up, do what they say they're going to do, and be proud of seeing success. Don't just do it for the cameras. Don't just do it for the media. Don't just do it for the next wave of money that's going to come in to trickle down into your pockets. Do it because you want to see someone actually succeed. That's what I say.
That's incredibly powerful. Thank you, Christine. Anthony, what do you think about some potential solutions?
Well, the first one I think of is
At the state level, ABAG, the state agency that usually dictates to the cities how much affordable housing each of them produces, should be given more teeth, the ability to find cities that don't meet their RHNA goals of their housing element each year. And I think in theory that would cause a lot of cities who have totally ignored the RHNA goals to actually begin to build affordable housing in their cities to avoid these fines. But Chris was right. In the after housing scenarios, there needs to be a more comprehensive aftercare program put in place to help those of us who maybe need a little bit more attention when reacclimating ourselves to the everyday things that come along with being housed. Also, I guess you would call it partisan politics needs to be like kind of stopped. Those local politicians that are really, beholden to business, and in this case, developers, wind up, stopping the generation of affordable housing development by putting in, or opposing things that come along, like in 2015, the Affordable Housing Impact Fee exempted the downtown area from the fees for a certain amount of years, I believe. And at that time, development in downtown was just booming. And I still look at it when I'm in the downtown area, if how much money would have been generated if that square foot fee would have been put in place in downtown then, and how much that could have gone to the development of ELI, VLI, and LI housing. So, I mean, we also need to look at all the tools in the toolbox, whether, we agree with them or not. I think commercial linkage needs to be looked at one more time and given a, fair, at least a nexus study to show what it would look like for our city. That's about all I can think of right now.
Thanks, Anthony. Thanks for sharing some really practical examples of things the lawmakers could do or could have done, in your opinion, to help bring in some much needed money to alleviate the crisis. So our last question before we get to audience questions, as we mentioned, this forum is based off of our columns called In Your Backyard, which run every third Thursday of the month on sanjosespotlight.com. And two of the panelists here today write for that column. And that's Jerome and it's Chris. And in that column, they share their real life experiences, as they've done today. So I want to ask you guys, what do you want readers to take away from your column? Let's start with you, Chris, and then Jerome.
Sorry, forgot about me. Well, my first column for In Your Backyard was during an election portion of the year, so I didn't really get to go in depth of what, my passion and everything, but I did get to go in depth with my political. But what I would want Spotlight readers to get is that don't give up on people. When you see someone on the street and they look like they need help or they just need a smile, talk to them, because seriously, they probably do. And you never know how much that would make a person's day to just really connect with them, and it just takes a smile. Don't look through them. Yeah.
Thank you, Chris, for sharing that. Jerome, what do you want people to take away from your columns?
I basically want people to know that people need to always be heard. Sometimes a lot of times there's no voice for the homeless people. Like I'm like a president of the Sunnyvale Collaborative that we have at the Sunnyvale Shelter, because I want people to always have like a voice on what goes on in the shelter or even in the community. I'm not a very outspoken person, pretty quiet and pretty shy, but I mean, sometimes, if people can't speak for themselves, you need someone out there to speak for them. And I always want people to know that, there are a lot of homeless individuals who have things to say, but just don't have the avenue to be able to have their voices heard. So, you know, what I put in writing is, you know, are my opinions, but hopefully, you know, my opinions reflect, you know, the will and, you know, kind of what other homeless individuals in, you know, other situations, you know, would want. And that's just like, you know, to be treated fairly and, you know, have, you know, an equitable way of life. So I just want people to know that, you know, what you read is, you know, me trying to at least put my voice forward for those people that actually don't have a voice that people can hear.
Thanks, Jerome. I love that so much because that is the reason we created In Your Backyard, was to give you that platform to be able to bring your stories and elevate your voice, and for people to hear directly from you, unfiltered. And I think that puts a face on the issue, right? People can see and hear from you directly and know that behind these numbers, there are people, there are real people, and here are their stories. So I want to thank you, all three of you, all of our panelists, for your courage in telling your stories. This is not easy, you know, sitting in front of a camera and talking about these incredibly personal things, and knowing that there are people who judge you, and you courageously told your stories and raised your voice. And for that, I am so thankful. And I know our readers are so thankful as well. So thank you so much. And before we wrap, I want to ask you guys a few questions from the audience. And this one came in through our chat box. So I'm just going to pull it up real quick here. Shauna Rose wants to know, she's asking all the panelists, what can we do to help? And we can start, maybe Anthony, do you want to start? And then we'll jump to Jerome and Chris.
As I was saying earlier, you know, it's everybody's, I guess, right to like call their local official, elected official, and complain, but it's also our obligation to actually say, to look into the situation more and see what they can do. So I'd say education would probably be the best start to, like, you know, find out how homelessness is being affected, what the situations are going on in our city and county and state, and maybe find ways where you could plug in to be like add your voice but others in helping to alleviate this by calling for the generation of more ELI, VLI, and LI housing. And a lot of other ways you could probably find, you know, to become more involved politically, instead of just like, here's, you know, I give my donation. That's what would be my answer.
Great. Jerome, do you want to jump in?
So
what can we do to help?
So I think, you know, individuals just kind of need to get out of like their comfort zone a little bit and, you know, go, you know, interact with homeless individuals. Like today, you know, I was able to go out and hand out water, you know, and food to individuals because it was blazing hot like these last few days. And a lot of homeless people don't have, you know, access to cold water or, you know, food on days like this. You know, and there were no cooling centers open, which was, you know, disappointing from the county's perspective, because the county had agreed to open cooling centers when the temperature was over 88 degrees on any day of the year. So I really don't know what happened there. But I think if individuals, you know, don't be afraid of, you know, homeless individuals, you know, because if you're afraid of them, then you kind of treat them like they're not, you know, not human. Just kind of get over your fears, volunteer. We have individual groups that come and volunteer at the shelter that I'm at, you know, come and cook meals, volunteer, you know, donate clothing, toiletries, things like that. Just anything that, you know, you would want someone else to do for you if you're like in that same situation.
Thanks, Jerome. And finally, Chris, to the question about what can we do to help?
I'm on the same page with both Jerome and Anthony. Actually, it reminded me of a story with what Jerome just said. There was one day when me and my husband, we didn't have a tent or anything at this point, and we were sleeping outside in downtown. And this van pulled up, and this little boy and this little girl came out, and they had 2 hot apple pies and 2 Big Macs. And they came out of the van, and the grandma rolled down the window and watched as her probably grandson, granddaughter, came out, and they tapped on our heads and said, "Hi, would you like some of this?" And it was the first sunny day after a rain, and we woke up, and we looked up, and it was 2 angels, it was just beautiful. Things like that help. The unexpected blessings help, but on a big spectrum. Jerome's right. I don't know all the abbreviations that he was saying, the LVI, and I don't know all those terms, but you can talk to him about politics. All I know is about good blessings.
For the audience at home, in case, I know there were some acronyms that were thrown out. RENA are the state housing goals. ELI is extremely low income. But yeah, those terms are hard to know, so no worries. So there's a few more questions. This one comes from an anonymous attendee, and it's to everyone. It's a really good question. The question is, what are your thoughts on the housing first model to solve homelessness? Do you think a lot of your problems would be solved if you had secure, low-cost housing? Do any of you guys want to jump in first? Anthony, I'll let you start.
I actually was housed through the Housing First model, not just this time, but once before in Portland, Maine. And both of them are successful as you look at it in theory. Now, I'm not going to say I'm well and wonderful. I still have room for growth, but the Housing First model, as it was applied here through the Housing 1000 program, allowed me to have that stability, to be able to have that growth, the growth that I've been able to accomplish so far. And I've seen, through my peers, from my peers through my advocacy work, it do a lot of great wonders for a lot of people who may have literally died on the streets if not for the Housing First model. So I think that it's something to be more invested in heavily, and I think we did so to an extent with the passage of Measure A, but there needs to be more things like that to generate the money for these housing opportunities so that people can be housed through the Housing First model. Yeah, I'm all for
it. And Chris and Jerome, do either of you have anything to add on that issue? If not, that's okay. We can move on to the next question. But again, the question was, what are your thoughts on the Housing First model? And do you think that a lot of your problems would be solved if you had secure, low-cost housing? It looks like Jerome.
Yeah, I mean, basically, that's my goal, is to get housing, not just for me, but for me and my son. Because if it was just me, then I could rent a room and be fine. But having a child that has special needs, he's not able to have roommates. He needs to have his own space. And I feel kind of that I've let him down because I haven't been able to hold on to stable housing for his benefit. And so because I work, and I'm able to save, but I still can't afford to have a place for me and my son. So, if I did have stable housing, that would change my life dramatically, because I would have my son in a stable environment where he's comfortable, and, where I could see him, every day instead of, every other weekend and things like that. So, you know, basically, I believe like if I did have, you know, permanent stable housing, like that would be like a life-changing like event for me and my son.
Thanks, Jerome. Chris, do you want to chime in on this one?
Yeah, I'm all for, you know, the housing. I think I want nothing more than that for everyone. What I want to see differently, and luckily Anthony has been through it, so he's grown, and you know, but there needs to be whoever is in charge of acclimating the residents together, especially when children are involved. There needs to be definite help there with for safety measures. You know, not saying that, you know, that it's unsafe, but I'm saying like the education level of what they're saying, they're putting in a group of people in an encased place, and it's just, it shouldn't just be a no holds barred. You know, there needs to be actual credentialed help and stable help. They need to know, the residents need to know that those people are going to be there for them, because you can't be all willy-nilly. One day you have someone that you look to for confidence, and that you look to for anything, and then the next day they're gone. The overturn, the turnaround that happens with the mental health industry right now is just, it's so insane. No pun intended, but you know, it's enough to make someone feel unstable when you're trying to get stability. So that needs to be definitely taken care of. But I'm so for, they need to build more housing, but it just needs to be so that people don't get housed and then they get turned out within the next year because they didn't get what the help they needed. You know, there's nothing worse than getting housed and then finding yourself back on the streets again. That'd be terrifying.
Right, so really pairing the housing with the services, right?
Yeah.
The next question is from another anonymous attendee, and this person would like to know your thoughts, panel, on the effectiveness of bridge housing programs such as the tiny homes, which San Jose just opened its first tiny homes community. We'll open this up to the panel, anyone that wants to jump in and share their thoughts about that.
Sure. I believe that bridge housing is a necessary step, especially in our region where the generation of permanent supportive housing projects is slow due to a lot of variables. There still needs to be a safe, secure, sanitary place for people who are on the streets to be able to exist without fear or repercussion from law enforcement or the neighborhood or even their peers. So bridge housing is a very necessary thing here in this region, but it has to be done thoughtfully. It can't be what quote unquote FEMA camps, you know, these myths we've heard all these years, but it also can't be some heavy-handed situation that would make people who are already reluctant to engage, you know, draw back even more. So yes, I do believe in them, but I do believe they have to be done correctly. And as far as what San Jose has done so far, I see they're off to a good start.
Absolutely. Does anyone else want to share their thoughts about the tiny homes communities and bridge housing in general?
Sure. I agree. I just want to say, I agree.
Chris approves. Okay, Jerome, what do you think?
Yeah, I think anything that can help, homeless individuals off the street, is a good idea. It's just the fact that tiny homes are still transitional housing, and we have to have, some place for those individuals to transition to after their time is up in a tiny home. These aren't, permanent housing solutions. Um, it's just a way for individuals, I guess, to, kind of get prepared to move into permanent housing solutions. But, there, the number of bridge housing or these tiny homes that are, available now and planning on being built, doesn't put a dent in the number of homeless individuals that actually need, somewhere to live. There's still a lot, unknown about, the criteria that individuals will have to meet and how long individuals will be allowed to stay. I'm definitely, in support of, these housings, but, after people's stays are up, they have to have somewhere to go. That's my view on it.
Right, absolutely. At the end of the day, those are just temporary solutions, right? Not long term. I want to get to two more questions if we can. We'll try really hard to squeeze them in from our audience. And one of them deals with transit systems and unhoused people on transit systems. What resources can the transit agencies like VTA, for example, or BART, what kind of resources can they provide to help folks who are on transit who are unhoused and don't have a destination?
I believe the first thing is that VTA worked with the county to develop and the CFC to develop what is called the Uplift Pass, which was designed for people experiencing homelessness. But I feel that there is a lot of barriers and hoops for people to jump through. It's not like, if you can just show, prove you're homeless, you can get a pass. I mean, you have to either have like a numerous amount of preset doctor visits or some type of established structure visit in order to like qualify for these passes. And when you're experiencing homelessness, you don't have the luxury of having all these things all calendarized and itinerary for you. I mean, like getting to the Alexian clinic, the homeless health clinic on the east side would, greatly affect, be effective to somebody living, in Willow Glen or on the west side. But because of these restrictions, it's hard for them to get an uplift pass. So I think like maybe the administrators of these programs need to like rethink how they open doors for homeless people in these programs. I mean, I think there needs to be more, even for people who are housed, the bus passes that are $25. I mean, there's not enough of them in the market for people, and I think they need to open it up a little bit. I understand that right now, because of this pandemic, there's a slowdown in VTA activity, but this has been one of the most, since I've been a kid, like active and growing transit systems. And so for them not to be able to carve out a portion of their budget, a considerable portion of their budget, to help like low income individuals in their community to get around, kind of seems disingenuous.
Thanks for sharing, Anthony. And Chris, do you want to weigh in on this, the transit agencies?
I used to ride Motel 22 for a few years. That's Route 22, and we would ride it. Me and my husband, we would ride it all night until it would not ride for about 45 minutes, and then it would start up again. Sometimes a little bit longer, depending upon the bus driver. And that was our warmth. That was, and it was jam-packed, elbow to elbow, full with other homeless people, and we became a family. You know, we knew, and if one of us was missing, we knew to wait, hold the bus. You know, so and so's not on yet. You know, but it has become they've tried to, I think, take that away due to I don't know why. I don't know politics of it, but I think it's safety measures or whatever. But they've tried to take that away, and that is for the longest time has been for, especially for women, for homeless women. When I was alone on the streets and my husband wasn't around, that was a form of safety. I knew the bus driver was there. You know, I knew, you know, that was a place, that was a sanctuary. And so when they started taking that away, they started revoking the hours, and then for a while there, they stopped it all in all. And that, I think, was, I mean, a huge mistake, just because it took away so much of something that again, someone that doesn't have much of anything that they needed, you know, and they don't realize what they did. But I don't know if it's back up and running now.
Yeah.
Now?
So they saved my understanding is they saved the route after there was some talk of permanently eliminating it. They saved it, but that it is now suspended temporarily because of COVID-19, and they've reduced their services. So that's what I've heard, but that it's not permanently gone away. So.
Okay, that's good, because I think that, and like Anthony was saying, you know, they do need to look at something that they can do more so focused for the individuals that can't afford, can't do do their programs that they have right now. But I definitely hope that they keep that up and rolling when they can, when the pandemic's over, or especially for the women that need it.
And we've gone over by about 4 minutes, so this will be our last question, and we'll try to squeeze this in quickly. This question comes from Ruben Navarro, and he is asking, have any of you heard if there are any services to help our homeless community get stimulus checks? Is that being talked about at all in San Jose? And I have not heard anything about that, but I want to open it up to you, Anthony.
A lot of during my outreach, the board that I'm on, the Lived Experience Advisory Board, they've been distributing food into camps. And so like I've been able to through them or individually talk to some of my peers who have been applying for their stimulus checks. And it's now there's no set program, and because social services is limited by appointment only now because of the pandemic. But the information is out there, Ruben, and people are availing themselves of it. I don't think it's as comprehensive as it has been for people, you know, who are able to see the news all the time. But people are always gonna, like, you know, share when there's free money on the table. And even especially in socioeconomic situations where people, you know, don't have very much. And so like I've seen like some of my peers who have gotten their money already go back and show others how, you know, with the steps that they took to, you know, to actually go to the irs.gov site and walk them through the filling out of the W-2 form, or not W-2, your tax form, to get the money. one of the things is like, is a downside, if you want to call it that, is because of the way that the IRS informs you of when you're going to get your stuff. A lot of people get anxious about, oh, I'm not getting it yet, and they kind of like reapply or like start, the process again, not which kind of slows them down again, because the IRS now has like 2 forms from them instead of just the one. But it's easy to alleviated, and a lot of them are a lot of people are being able to take advantage of the situation, or utilize the situation rather.
Unfortunately, we have to wrap up. I know there's more to say. Actually, if it's okay, we may be able to go for a few more minutes. I know this was billed until 6:15, but Chris, let me let you chime in, and then I'm gonna let our viewers also know how they can submit questions. So if we didn't get to yours today, you didn't have a chance to ask, I'm gonna leave my contact information in the chat box where you guys can please send me the questions, and I will forward them to the panelists, and we'll get those answered one way or another, even if we're not able to do it today in this amount of time. So with that being said, let's have Chris chime in on this too.
Okay, hi Ruben. Yeah, I just want to say I filled it out 3 different times for 3 different things because I thought I filled it out wrong, but it worked out for me. But so just keep trying, and for me it worked out. But I had to fill out 3 different applications, and it worked out. So heads up, it'll work out.
Right. Thank you guys. Thank you guys so much. I think we may be able to take one more. Actually, I'm told that we can go until 6:30. I thought it was over at 6:15. So yay! If you guys are okay with hanging out with us a little longer, we'll take a few more. And thank you, panelists, for being there. We can probably take one more for sure. Anonymous says, Chris, they really like your t-shirt. Is there a way that they can buy that t-shirt? So that's kind of cool. So we answered the question on tiny homes. Let's see here. This is another question specifically for you, Christine. They want to know, how do you become homeless, and how can you get out of that situation? How do you become homeless, and how do you get out of that situation?
How did I become homeless? Well, I was in a very, that just caught me off guard right then. I became homeless back right after 2002, I think. I got married and I was very successful. Got married, was in a very abusive relationship to where my skull was crushed in 6 months into the marriage, and I was in a 3-month coma. Woke up, and he told my husband at that time, he told the hospital and the police that a TV, and not talking flat screen, we're talking old school TV, fell on top of my head that was wall mounted. That's how bad. I'm deaf in one ear, and but I one day when he left for work, I left my cell phone, my credit cards, my house, kissed my 2 dogs goodbye, and I left and never looked back. Actually, I never even had a record or anything until I did that, because I was asleep in Willow Street Park when the police came, and I had no ID, and they arrested me for loitering in a park past dark. And that was my first offense ever in my life, and I was 29. So, yeah, that's how I became homeless. And back then in Willow Glen, you didn't talk about domestic violence. You didn't talk about anything like that. So I left, and yeah, so that's how I became homeless.
How did you get out of it?
Being homeless? Actually, I was kind of a long story, but the short of it is, I was inside a Target, and from my my traumatic brain injury, I had a cerebral hemorrhage and inside a target, and I didn't die from it, which would have been a brain aneurysm, but I survived it. And after that, I was sent to a shelter, and I met my now husband, and he's been my angel ever since. I bet he asked that. No, I'm just kidding.
There's a happy ending there.
Yeah, there is.
And it's good to hear that some stories do end well, right? With happy endings. So thank you again, everybody, for tuning in. Once again, thank you to the panelists for their, their willingness to talk about these issues. It takes a lot of courage. And thank you, everyone, for watching and giving us your time. And hopefully this opened your eyes to some of the issues that people on our streets today face and some potential solutions. Once again, thank you to our sponsors who made this possible: Abode Services, Destination Home, Santa Clara County Housing Authority, SB at Home, Frank Ponciano for coordinating. And I included my email address at the bottom of the chat box. So any questions that we didn't get to, I know some attendees raised their hand. We asked everyone to actually type in questions in the chat box below. Please send those questions that you may have had that we didn't get to my email address, ramona@sanjosespotlight.com. And we'll forward them to the panelists and we'll get those answers for you. And also please read In Your Backyard. It's our column. It's every third Thursday of the month. You'll hear from these folks through that column. And thank you so much for joining us and supporting San Jose Spotlight. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. Thanks.